Hi, my name is Larry Cecila, and I'm going to talk to you today about a project I just recently completed that's a loft bed with 101 spindles on it. So this is a picture of the loft bed after it was had the finish applied and the stain and just about ready to leave the shop. And what's interesting about this bed isn't so much the bed itself. I mean, it's a fairly straightforward project that involves a lot of square cuts and a lot of tenons and mortises and that sort of thing. But what's probably more interesting about the bed is the 101 spindles that you can see here. And as you can see, each one of these spindles, each end of them goes into a precise mortise. And the spindles themselves are an inch by a half an inch with a quarter-inch radius, making basically the equivalent of a half-inch diameter on each end. So they're an inch long and a half of an inch wide. And here's a kind of a close-up picture so you can see what exactly the end of this thing looks like. So the trick is to make these mortises and make them very precise, very exact. And make them in such a way that everyone is going to be exactly the same and positioned in exactly the right place. So I've had the good fortune of taking a couple of classes from Michael Fortune at the Mark Adams School of Woodworking, and Michael Fortune has written a number of articles in fine woodworking. And back in 2008, he put this an article in the magazine that featured this jig. It's a mortising jig, and it's extremely versatile. And I kind of looked at it when it was in the magazine and thought, well, that's really nice. And then last year, I happened to be taking a class from Michael at the Mark Adams School, and he brought this jig along, and we actually used this jig in class. And so when I got back from class, I decided, you know, I don't necessarily have a specific application for this jig at this particular time, but, you know, sooner or later I probably will. So I decided to build the jig. And so this talk is really going to be about the jig more than anything else. So here is a picture of my version of the jig. And with it, you can see the particular router that I'm using. It's a DeWalt DW621K. The jig is made specifically for the router, so this jig will only work with this router. This particular application, you can see I'm using a 1/2 inch spiral carbide spiral upcut router bit, and there is the jig. The jig is pretty much as described in the magazine article, and here is a little bit closer picture of the jig. And the way this jig works is the work that you're actually going to be putting the mortise in is fastened to the jig from the bottom, and you'll see that a little bit later. And then the entire table can slide back and forth in order to adjust the position of the router bit wherever you need it to be over the workpiece. And then the two little tables, or the two little pieces on the right and the left, have got knobs, and you can adjust those in order to give the width of the router and make it whatever you want it to be. And so the process of setting this up is really pretty straightforward. First, you basically center the jig on top of the workpiece, and then you mark one of the mortises that you're actually going to be cutting. You can cut an infinite number of them, but you mark the first one, and then you very carefully set up these stops on either side in order to get the mortise exactly where it needs to be. You lock them down, and the jig is designed in such a way that once you have this set up and you lock these down, it's going to be extremely repeatable time after time after time, and there's no way to kind of mess it up. If you kind of look at the jig, you can see that the router is in there pretty tight. There really is no slop at all, except for its ability to slide to the left or to the right. So that's kind of a key design element, that when you build the jig, you build it to a particular router, and it's really only for that router. And Michael Fortune specifically recommended this particular router, and the base, as you can see, is flat, as opposed to Porter cables, routers, or most of the others have got a round base. Problem with round bases is that for them to be as repeatable as this one is, that round base may look like it's kind of precise in its circular in its being a perfect circle, but most of them really aren't. And furthermore, the physical position of the router base can vary slightly because there's a certain tolerance in the holes. And you take the router base off and you put it back on again a second time. You may not be in exactly the same position. So this particular router eliminates that problem. It never changes. It's always the same, and it's a fairly straightforward thing to actually make this work. Looking at the jig from the front underneath, here you can see a workpiece that's being held in place with the cam clamps, and you can also see that there are numerous places where we have threaded inserts in the jig, which is used to make it versatile. So you can basically adjust this thing to accommodate whatever size workpiece you happen to have. Here's a bit of a close-up that kind of shows the same thing I showed in the previous slide. It's a little redundant, but you get the basic idea. Here you can see the workpiece underneath and the opening through which the router actually the bit extends through. We take the jig apart. The guts of the jig are fairly straightforward. There's a couple of ultra-high molecular weight slides that are routed into both the base and the top, and they're fairly precise, and they serve to keep the jig in perfect alignment as you move the top of the jig in and out. And so you probably don't have to use the ultra-high molecular weight plastic. You could use some hardwood. Most of the time I usually do, but Michael recommends it in his article, and I happened to see a piece of this stuff at my local woodcraft store, and so I picked it up, and so I've used it, and it's pretty nice to work with. Here's a little closer look at the front of the jig with the top of the jig off, and you can kind of see the different threaded inserts that are used throughout this entire jig. And here's a look at it from the back, where you can see some of the threaded inserts. Some of them are threaded in, some of them are just pounded in from the back. So that's the jig, and the last thing I'll show you is the satisfied customer. This was my grandson. Just took this picture the very first time he got up in his bed, and he totally loves it. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I would highly recommend you consider making this jig. It's not a particularly difficult thing to do, and you'll find over the years you'll have lots and lots of uses for this thing. So talk to you next time. Bye-bye.